Hear the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Luke.
Glory be to thee, O Lord.
The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from ploughing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink? Later you may eat and drink.' Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are only worthless slaves. We have only done what we ought to have done.'" This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to thee, O Christ.
So please be seated. I had some tricky readings recently, one way and another, and also some very memorable ones. Last week we had love of money as the root of all evil, and before that we had the parable of the unjust steward, or the crooked manager, or whatever you call it. And the idea of praying for those in authority, even if we don't approve of them. I used to really struggle with that when I lived under Mugabe, because there's the command there, plain to see, pray for your leaders. There's this tyrant, rapaciously destroying everything around him. And it was a struggle to kind of reconcile that idea of praying for those in authority at the same time, seeing those in authority do nihilistic and destructive and self-aggrandizing things to the ruin of everyone around them, basically. Anyway, today we have a kind of justification for these things, a kind of a way, possibly, to see our way through them, to negotiate them, to try and understand what's going on behind all these things. I think one of the things that is really challenging in daily life is the idea that it's worth doing the right thing. Because unless you think it's worth doing it, the chances are we won't really feel the need. To actually do the right thing for something more than a romantic fancy takes something more than a romantic fancy. I mean, if it's quite uncostly and sentimental affection and whimsy will do the job, then it's quite an attractive proposition, and we can flatter ourselves at how nice we are after we've done something that's actually good. But often to actually do something good, to do right, is not always that attractive in of itself. It can actually be costly at times. Costly in the sense of suffering the ill will and displeasure of someone around us, costly in losing a job or losing some income or losing some prestige, losing some goodwill, costly in the sense that we can see an opportunity, but we know we'll just have to be a little bit unscrupulous to exploit it. And then, when we're tempted to not do the right thing, we need a reason. We need a motive. And one of the great weaknesses of a lot of kind of ethical, moral systems is that there ultimately is no particular reason for it. If you follow through Richard Dawkins, for example, he says his life is meaningless. Well, if it's meaningless, it doesn't actually matter what we do. We can do anything. Happy days. But then he doesn't just do anything, does he? He speaks as if his words have meaning to those around him. And he doesn't go simply around thieving and stealing and lying and being cruel and spiteful and violent to everyone around him. Maybe he does in his private life, but certainly not in his public life. And there may be a kind of inhibition on that based on the fact that he knows that people will respond badly. And he's probably had an upbringing with a kind of a moral framework which we've probably recognised. And he has a kind of intuition that doing such things is somehow less than admirable. Maybe it's not such a great idea. But that's actually a completely irrational and inconsistent way of looking at things. To really see it through, to actually do the right thing, in spite at times perhaps of tremendous cost, we need something real behind us. We need something motivating and strengthening. You need something solid. And that's not easy. But I'm suggesting today that we begin to see a real reason for doing it. One of the psalms which used to comfort me when challenged by praying for those in authority in Zimbabwe, whilst looking at the ruin of the country, was this psalm, Psalm 37, and the first line, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Fret not thyself because of the ungodly, neither be thou envious of those that are evildoers." The Hebrew verb there means to boil, or to stew, or to burn. So, fretting is not a bad word for it, but boiling and burning are also good words which I can relate to at times. And reading sometimes things happening in public life, it feels tempted to boil or burn or rage or whatever, because some things are wicked or stupid or horrible, and one feels powerless about them. And being shafted in private life, one might be tempted to burn or boil or stew or fret. Because I mentioned some time ago a car thing. I broke a wing mirror on a rented van and I was charged £200 for the damage. I looked up the spare part, it cost 20 quid, next day delivery including postage and packaging. So I was charged 10 times the value of the part, the component, for a simple snap-on job which I could have done. If I'd simply had a spare mirror and snapped it in, they'd never have known any different. And I felt outraged by the egregious profiteering of it. And likewise, recently, the dentist wanted to charge me full fare for not turning up to the hygienist. And I didn't get their correspondence. I actually got 3 letters after the phone call, which threatened me with debt collectors after a mere 18 days. I think they actually may have broken the law there. I think to phone up someone with threats and menaces is actually illegal under common law, which I pointed out to the company. And they kind of skirted that particular issue. And they let me off the fee. But nevertheless, that is at the very best sharp practice. I mean, it's basically company policy with my dentist to send debt collectors or threats of them after 18 days of non-payment, which for goods and services not delivered I regard as an outrage. That's unethical. So I can only surmise that my dentist will never be a blue chip company, since its base is so obviously unethical, even if it's not actually criminal. And one is tempted to fret and burn. So what does one do? You know, what are we supposed to do? How do we deal with this? And the psalmist says, don't do it, basically. Just don't stew. Don't stew in your rage. Don't let it get hold of you. He says, refrain from anger, leave rage alone. Do not fret yourself, it leads only to evil. And that's probably good sound advice. The psalm is actually written in what's called an acrostic, meaning that each 2 lines of the psalm, or each 2 verses of the psalm, begin initially with the letters of the alphabet. And that form is usually a form associated with wisdom. So this psalm should be interpreted as, you might say, wisdom, good advice. It's telling us how things are in the universe and the best way to negotiate them. So this isn't so much about, this isn't primarily about the covenants which God establishes with us, about salvation as such. But then it does refer to those things. It says, put your trust in the Lord and do good. The name the Lord is the covenant name, the name of the promise, the name of the Lord's initiative, his loving kindness towards us to establish us and redeem us and recreate us. In other words, we're enjoined in wisdom to put our trust in the Lord and to do good, in spite of the evil around us. To not be misled, to not stew in rage at the egregious offences of the wicked doers around us, but to trust in the Lord. So the antidote to this is to trust in the Lord. If you like, the opposite of this is to take delight in the Lord. And it says he shall give you your heart's desire. It's a lovely verse to remember that. I will recommend that to you. It just won't be one of those ones you kind of write down somewhere and think about. Take delight in the Lord, and he shall give you your heart's desire. And the next half of that, commit your way to the Lord and put your trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. But the psalm keeps returning to this idea of trust as the opposite of responding in anger. That is, I think, our moral choice, our spiritual choice. In the reading from Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk is crying out about the same thing. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you not listen? Violence and you're not saved. He's seeing the people in his land doing evil, and he's appalled by it. He's horrified by it. He's grieved by it. And he's saying to God, why aren't you sorting all this out? Why aren't you doing something about all this? And the Lord responds. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but the last lines are the one, if you like, the takeaway. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them. Look at those who are swollen up inside. There's something wrong with them. They are actually wrong inside. There's something wrong about their makeup. This greed, this pride, this vanity, their unscrupulousness come from the fact that they are wrong in their very inner being. There is something profoundly wrong with them inwardly. But the opposite of this, returning to this idea of trust, that the righteous live by their faith. The righteous man shall live by his faith. Another great takeaway verse. Again, this idea of faith and trust. Interestingly, in both Greek and Hebrew, the words are the same. In English, we've got three words, faith, trust and belief. And in Greek and Hebrew, they're all the same word. So you have to kind of get the nuance of it from the context. But of course, that means, therefore, that faith and trust and belief are intrinsically linked together as ideas. We tend to mentally compartmentalise them, separate them out in some way. But from the point of view of Scripture, we can't do that. We have to tie them together. They're intrinsically linked. The righteous shall live by their faith. The righteous shall live by trusting in the Lord, by not being wrong inside. So the way to not be wrong inwardly is to have this trust in the Lord. To, if you like, be straightened out. To see the purpose of doing good. To see that putting trust in the Lord and doing good, dwell in the land and feed on its riches, is to live by faith. That's what it means. And that's kind of what Paul's saying to Timothy. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. The Spirit of God for love and self-discipline. But then he repeatedly returns to this idea of trust. For I know the one in whom I put my trust, and I'm sure he's able to guard until that day what I have entrusted to him. He's talking about God. The things that concern Paul, he has entrusted to God. No doubt Paul would have been grieved at evil doing just as much as Habakkuk and the psalmist. And here we come to this idea of trust in the gospel. The apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith, increase our trust, increase our belief, you might say. And the Lord does this rather kind of non sequitur answer. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could plant a tree in the sea. Well, in my experience, it doesn't happen very often. So I don't know if he's teasing them, saying even if you had the tiniest bit of faith, you could do something outrageous. And you obviously haven't, so therefore you haven't even got faith that tiny. But then maybe he's saying, hang on boys, you're missing the point. Maybe he's saying, maybe that this faith thing which you're on about is not just for fireworks and spectacular, extraordinary actions. Maybe it's for something else. Maybe the whole point of it, or the direction of it, is not spectacular, singular events. Maybe it's doing something. This faith which they want, maybe it's not for showing off. But then he talks about ploughing or tending sheep in the field and taking place at table. Now if you think about it, the image of ploughing is used in parables, isn't it? Paul said, one ploughs, another sows, another reaps, and all share in the joy of the harvest, all have their share. He talks about the parable of the sower, Jesus being the Son of Man who goes around scattering the seeds and all this kind of thing. He talks about us imitating these things. He talks about himself as the good shepherd, tending sheep, and then he said to Peter, tend my sheep, to the apostles. He himself is the host at the wedding feast of the Lamb. He is the bridegroom. He is the host at our table. But he also enjoins us to be hospitable and to be gracious to one another. And so when he's talking about ploughing and tending sheep and the table, these are things which he has done for us. We are his sheep. We are his field. We're his guests. We're seated at his table. So these are things he has done for us. And these are things which he wants us to do for one another and for him. But I think the other aspect of this is that God is now one's debtor. If we do what is right, God doesn't think, wow, I really owe him now. He's done something right for once. Deserves a prize. It's kind of back to front, because actually we owe it to God to do what's right. We simply owe it. And if we do wrong, we've failed in our duty. We've simply failed to do what is right. So it's not as if we get a bonus for doing what is right, because we should have done that anyway. And so I think part of what Jesus is saying here is that by doing what's right, you're simply doing what you ought to do. You don't get a special prize for simply doing what you ought to do. But that's what your faith is actually for. It's for doing what you ought to do. It's also saying, of course, that you actually need faith to do what you ought to do. But if you don't have faith, you won't be able to do it. It won't make any sense. It won't work. There'll be no motive. There'll be no purpose. There'll be no goal to it. It simply won't happen. And so I think Jesus is directing them away from one way of looking at faith into another, saying, if you want to actually do what the Lord wants you to do, you're going to need that faith. And that faith is going to be the thing which sustains you and motivates you through all these things, which may seem ordinary, but which, without faith, will seem pointless and purposeless and futile. And so I think that's how all these things link together. The idea of not fretting over the ungodly, not burning with rage, not stewing in outrage, not being driven into doing stupid or wicked things because of our outrage over the evil that people have done. And needing that faith to delight in the Lord, to do good, to trust him, and to think, put it in contemporary language, this is above my pay grade. I'll just do what I can and let the Lord straighten it out. And one of the kind of encouragements I have about this, there's a book published a little while ago called Live Not by Lies. It's a quote from Solzhenitsyn. I think it was featured in the church magazine, the MA magazine a little while ago. I did a little kind of digest of it. And the man was saying, Solzhenitsyn was saying, the grip of communism on the Soviet Union was basically the grip of a lie. And the only way it functioned was by the common people, the ordinary people, actually joining in and repeating and participating in the great lie, which was the communist system. And we don't have to do it. No one of us has to join in with the lie. And I think there are lies around in our culture now. Lies about sharp practice in business, lies about politics, lies about all kinds of things. Some of them, I think, frankly, are absolutely preposterous. I can't believe anyone has ever taken them seriously. But they are lies. But we don't have to believe them. We don't have to join with them. But to actually oppose them and not do them can appear intimidating. It can appear costly, and sometimes it can be costly. And people have been in court for simply not towing the line about some lie which has been dredged up from somewhere. And it's costly both in financial terms to do that, but also in emotional and moral terms. To actually take a stand against some egregious falsehood, whether it's crookedness in business, whether it's some spurious theory or whatever, it can be costly for anyone to simply say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to join in. I will not repeat this. This is wrong. Therefore, I will not do it. But to actually do that will take faith. To actually go through with that, you need to believe in something. And I think that's what all this is about. We have something to believe in. We have a greater purpose. And if we look at the world around us, this isn't all we get. So if things don't go particularly well for us on earth because we have done what is right and because we've stuck to the truth, actually it doesn't matter. Because our home is in heaven. And we're waiting for those wonderful words. Well done, good and faithful servant. Come and share your master's happiness. Welcome home, son, daughter. Come to my house. Jesus said, I'm going ahead to prepare a home for you, a house for you, a place for you, so that where I am, you may be also. And the first fruit of that, the first sign of that is his Spirit indwelling in us now, in the present. His presence with us now. He is ascended to the Father's side, interceding for us now. He is our advocate, speaking up on our behalf before the Father now. And in time, he will bring all these things according to his good purpose, to whatever end he will. But in the meantime, he says, put your trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on its riches. Take delight in the Lord, and he shall give you your heart's desire. Commit your way to the Lord and put your trust in him, and he will bring it to pass. He will make your righteousness as clear as the light, and your just dealing as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him, and do not fret yourself over the one who prospers, the one who succeeds in evil schemes. For the righteous will live by their faith. So there you go. A good reason, a good purpose, and a good end. Guaranteed. Guilt investment. Amen.